Good evening, and welcome to another spooky episode of Codo Cinema, the podcast show where I talk about movies. I bid you welcome as your host, Mark Codo, aka Codoman. Codo Cinema Horror Month continues on, and we got another spooky but also exciting episode to talk about on Codo Cinema. So before I dive into the movie that I'm going to talk about, I just want to say to those who are new to the podcast, welcome to Codo Cinema. And if you're listening to this on YouTube, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button for more content. And if you are listening to this through Spotify or Podbean, don't forget to hit the follow button as well. So, with that being said, let's get right to the movie, folks. So, you are wondering what movie I'm going to talk about. Well, apparently, this movie that I'm going to talk about is none other than the 1987 American comedy horror film, The Lost Boys. Now, The Lost Boys, the movie itself, which came out in 1987, it was directed by Joel Schumacher. Yes, the same Joel Schumacher who would direct Batman 3 and 4. To which anybody's knowledge, Batman 3 is basically Batman Forever, the one with Val Kilmer, and then of course Batman 4 being the infamous Batman and Robin. Yes, that's the same Joel Schumacher who would direct Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. To which I haven't come around to reviewing those movies yet, but somewhere down the line I will. I have seen those movies before, so yeah, I have seen both Joel Schumacher's Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. Yeah, Batman and Robin being the infamous movie that became one of the worst superhero movies of all time. But Joel Schumacher has done some other good films too. Like for example, he did the Falling Down movie, which actually got him critical acclaim. Plus, he also worked on Phantom of the Opera, to which that movie received mixed reviews, but I heard good things about that movie too. And then of course you have The Lost Boys, which is considered by many people, which is considered to be, in my opinion, his second best movie because a lot of people are going to remember Joel Schumacher for directing the two Batman movies, Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. But of course, he has done other movies before, like Falling Down, and then of course The Lost Boys. He also contributed to writing movies as well. Like for example, he did the 1978 movie called The Wiz, which is basically the adaptation from the 1974 Broadway musical. And of course, yes, it's basically reimagined from the classic Wizard of Oz story as well, with an African American cast. To which he did the screenplay for that movie, which came out in 1978. But other than that, he has worked on other movies before. So so with The Lost Boys is another movie that he has worked on, and in my opinion, The Lost Boys is basically his second best movie. I mean, obviously around that time, 1987, that's probably the best that he did. But of course, it's his second best since Falling Down came out in the 90s. Yeah, Joel Schumacher, he directed The Lost Boys. And this movie was also produced by Harvey Bernhard, with a screenplay written by Jeffrey Baum, Janice Fisher, and James Jeremias, to which both Fisher and Jeremias would do the story. In fact, Jeffrey Baum did the screenplay for the third Indiana Jones movie that came out in 1989. Just to throw that out there. And the film has an ensemble cast which includes Corey Feldman, Jamie Gertz, Corey Haim, Edward Herman, Barnard Hughes, Jason Patrick, Kiefer Sutherland, Jameson Newlander, and Diane Weiss. And of course, the cinematography was done by Michael Chapman, edited by Robert Brown, with music by Thomas Newman, and it was distributed by Warner Brothers Pictures along with the Richard Donner production. The film came out on July 31st, 1987, and it has a runtime of 97 minutes, and it had a budget of $8.5 million and it grossed $32.5 million. To which to which 32 to which 32.5 million, that is actually a commercial success around that time. and it was a critical success as well. And prior to release, it has since then been described as a cult classic, to which the success of the film 21 years after its release spawned a franchise with two low budget sequels, The Lost Boys The Tribe and Lost Boys The Thirst, and two comic book series. So anyway, you're probably wondering what the plot of this movie is. So the film follows two teenaged brothers who move with their divorced mother to the fictional town of Santa Carla, California, only to discover that the town is a haven for vampires. And of course, the title is a reference to The Lost Boys and J.M. Barrie's stories about Peter Pan and Neverland, who, like vampires, never grow up. And I think that whole statement fits it perfectly because if you really think about it, Peter Pan, I mean, let's be honest, Peter Pan is not a vampire, but he is in a different world where he never grows up, which is basically the whole point, much like vampires as well. Because as I mentioned, the title is a reference to the Lost Boys and J.M. Barrie's stories about Peter Pan and Neverland, who, like vampires, never grow up. So basically, the vampires in this movie don't grow up. That's the thing. So basically, they stay young forever. So that's basically like the reference. I mean, to be quite honest though, I always find the title to be a little weird because I always see the Lost Boys as more of a thing for Peter Pan, and I never thought that this would tie into be, and I never thought that this would be a movie title for like a vampire movie, right? I mean, when you think of vampires, I always think of because when I think of vampires, I always think of Count Dracula, right? Like Bela Lugosi's Count Dracula, even Christopher Lee's Dracula as well. I mean, even Adam Sandler voiced Dracula in 3 of the Hotel Transylvania movies. Plus, I also reviewed the 2023 Renfield movie, which I did during my 5th season of this podcast, to which Nicolas Cage played Count Dracula, to which I thought that movie was a lot of fun. And of course, you also have the Twilight Saga as well. Yes, you heard that right. Speaking of which, the Hotel Transylvania movie even poked fun of that as well because if you remember the scene when Count Dracula, who went into bat form, he flies up to find Jonathan inside an airplane, and he's basically watching what looks to be a parody which looks to be a parody of the Twilight Saga, where this girl who looks to be like Bella, so, and of course the vampire with the muscles is basically Edward, and this guy was like, "Tell me, do you dream about being a vampire?" And Count Dracula was like, "This is how we're represented. Unbelievable." I mean, that quote alone explains it all for how the Twilight Saga movies portrayed vampires. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, yes, I get it. Twilight Saga is popular, but at the same time, the vampires from before Twilight were a lot better. In fact, going into more of the production of this movie, these vampires in the Lost Boys, I mean, they're basically heavy metal and dangerous as well. They basically like I'm not kidding. Like the vampires in the Lost Boys, they're basically heavy metal bike riders while still retaining the vampire features. With long fingernails, the fangs, and of course still sleeping during the day, hanging upside down. You know what I'm saying? I mean, they still retain that, but my goodness, these vampires in the Lost Boys, to which I will talk more about this pretty soon, they're basically psychopaths in that movie. Come to think of it. But anyway, let's move forward with the production. So the whole idea of this movie started back in March of 1985, where a Variety News item announced that the independent production company Producers Sales Organization bought first-time screenwriters Janice Fisher and James Jeremiah's Lost Boys script for $400,000 on February 20th of 1985. However, Producers Sales Organization announced their acquisition of the project at the American Film Market in 1985, Warner Brothers later joined the project, taking over domestic distribution in some foreign territories. And yes, as I mentioned, the film's title is a reference to the characters featured in J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan stories, who, like vampires, never grow old. To which, funny enough, back in September, I actually did a kids theater production of Peter Pan Jr. at center stage, to which to which I did that a while to which I did that a while to which I did that back in September, and that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed doing the Peter Pan show at Center Stage Theater. Like I was doing the lights, the sound, the microphones. You know it, right? But anyway, let's move forward. Jeremiah said, I had read Anne Rice's interview with the vampire, and in that there was a 200-year-old vampire trapped in the body of a 12-year-old girl. Since Peter Pan had been one of my all-time favorite stories, I thought, what if the reason Peter Pan came out at night and never grew up and could fly was because he was a vampire? Now that ended in a question. That may sound like a theory right there, but this is kind of like the idea of like, what if Peter Pan was a vampire, right? And the Lost Boys were also vampires too, right? I mean, that seems like an interesting concept. My goodness, a horror film that features Peter Pan and the Lost Boys as vampires? That sounds like an interesting concept. But let's be honest, Joel Schumacher just stepped in and got to work on it. But of course, there is no Peter Pan in the Lost Boys movie, if you know what I'm saying, right? uh, there's no Peter Pan or Tinkerbell for those Lost Boys. uh, but anyway, according to academic William Patrick Day, the central theme of The Lost Boys, organized around loose allusions to Peter Pan, is the tension surrounding the Emerson family in the world of contemporary adolescence. Now, the film was originally set to be directed by Richard Donner, to which he directed the 1978 Superman movie. He was also involved in the Goonies movie, which came out in 1985. So, to which Fisher and Jeremiah's screenplay was modeled on Donner's recent film, The Goonies. And in this way, the film was envisioned as a more of a juvenile vampire adventure with 13 or 14-year-old vampires, while the Frog brothers were chubby 8-year-old Cub Scouts, and the character of Star was a young boy. When Donner committed to other projects, Joel Schumacher was approached to direct the film, although Donner eventually received credit as an executive producer. He came up with the idea of making the film sexier and more adult, bringing on screenwriter Jeffrey Boehm to retool the script and raise the ages of the characters. I'm pretty sure that explains why the film got an R rating too, right? Because this movie, I'm gonna be honest, it did go into, sexual territory, if you know what I'm saying, for some portions of the movie, if you know what I'm saying, right? So then, of course, we go to the casting, and Schumacher said he had one of the greatest casts in the world. They are what make the film. Most of the younger cast members were relatively unknown. Schumacher and Marion Daughtry met with many candidates. Jason Patric was approached early on by Schumacher to play Michael Emerson, but Patrick had no interest in doing a vampire film and turned it down many times. Eventually, he was won over by Schumacher's vision and his promise to allow the cast creative input in making the film. And then, of course, according to Kiefer Sutherland, Patrick was really instrumental in adapting the script with Schumacher and shaping the film. Schumacher also envisioned the character of Star as being a being a whitefish blonde, similar to Meg Ryan, but he was convinced by Jason Patric to consider Jamie Gertz, who had just worked with Patrick in Solar Babies, which came out in 1986. Schumacher was impressed, but only at Patrick's insistence did he finally cast Gertz. Schumacher was surprised when his first choice for the role of Lucy Diane Wiest accepted the role as she had just recently won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for Hannah and Her Sisters at the 59th Academy Awards. After seeing Kiefer Sutherland's portrayal of Tim in At Close Range, Schumacher arranged a reading with him in which they got on very well. Sutherland had just completed work on Stand By Me when he was offered the role of David. Schumacher said Sutherland, and I quote, can do almost everything. He's a born character actor. You can see it in The Lost Boys. He has the least amount of dialogue in the movie, but his presence is extraordinary. End of quote. And I think that explains it all too. Also to mention too, Sutherland actually broke his right wrist while doing a wheelie on his motorcycle and had to wear gloves on set to conceal the cast. His motorcycle for the movie was adapted so he could operate it with his left hand only. And then of course, we go to the filming process. Most of the film was shot in Santa Cruz, California, starting on June 2nd of 1986 and ending on June 23rd, 1986. After 21 days of filming, locations including the Santa Cruz Boardwalk, the Pago Nip Open Space Preserve, and the surrounding Santa Cruz Mountains. Other locations included a cliffside on the Palos Verdes Peninsula in Los Angeles County, used for the entrance to the Vampire Cave, and a valley in Santa Clarita near Magic Mountain, where introductory shots were filmed for the scene where Michael and the Lost Boys hang from a railway bridge. Stage sets included the Vampire Cave, built on Stage 12 of the Warner Brothers lot, and a recreation of the interior and exterior of the Pago Nip clubhouse on Stage 15, which stood in for Grandpa's house. And that's basically the end of the production right there. Now, I will say this. We should fly into the whole breakdown of this movie. So anyway, let's fly on over to The Lost Boys. So anyway, following the divorce of their parents Michael and Sam Everson, being played by Jason Patrick and Corey Haim, along with their mother Lucy, being played by Diane Wiest, they all moved to Santa Carla, which is basically the fictionalized town of this movie that's basically filling in for Santa Cruz, California, to live with their mother's father, a peculiar old man, being played by Barnard Hughes. Known as the murder capital of the world, Santa Carla boasts a local boardwalk where a number of young people hang out. Most notable is a group of young men and their leader named David, being played by Kiefer Sutherland. To which the movie also opens up with, with the night sky, floating up, the camera is going over the water and entering this fairground in California. It's basically nighttime, and that's basically David and the Lost Boys hanging out in that area. Plus, if you also notice too, the viewers are the Lost Boys flying to that fair. And I think that's a real clever way too, because it really indicates that, oh yeah, there are vampires flying in this movie, right? And I think we as the audience or viewers, we are getting that whole experience, like if we're the vampires, right? That's kind of like in Jaws, right? You remember in Jaws where you remember in Jaws, like there are some scenes where you don't see the shark, but the camera kind of zooms in on his victims, right? Which is basically Jaws eating his victims. That's basically what the Lost Boys is like for the flying scenes, right? And then of course, when the Emersons go out to the boardwalk for the first time, Lucy finds a video store run by a man named Max, who's being played by Edward Herman, although in this movie he's basically known as Ed Herman. They have a pleasant conversation and Lucy is soon hired by him. Sam finds a comic shop near the boardwalk overseen by the Frog Brothers, Edgar and Alan, both being played by Corey Feldman and Alan Jameson Newlander, and the two give Sam a comic about vampires, which Sam reluctantly takes. Meanwhile, Michael becomes enthralled by the mysterious and beautiful star being played by Jamie Gertz, who happens to be the girlfriend of David. David and his gang take Michael to their hideout, which is the remnants of an old hotel that collapsed during an earthquake. And by the way, there's a lot of stuff inside that hideout. There's even like it feels like a heavy metal cave, so to say, because keep in mind this movie came out in 1987, and it definitely screams 80s with a lot of heavy metal stuff as well. There is even a Jim Morrison poster inside that cave. In fact, just to go off topic, and I completely forgot to mention this, the music, like the music is definitely 80s heavy, right? And of course, we got songs like Good Times, Cry Little Sister, Lost in the Shadows, and People Are Strange. And The People Are Strange is a song by American rock band The Doors, which features Jim Morrison, right? However, I believe this one is a cover song this time around, and they're being sung by Echo and the Bunnymen. That song, as featured in the film, is an alternate shortened version with a slightly different music arrangement. So that's pretty clever too. It's kind of funny. It's kind of and it's kind of awesome that they put up a Jim Morrison poster inside the Lost Boys cave, right? But anyway, let's. But also, Thomas Newman does contribute to the score with an eerie blend of orchestra and organ arrangements. So anyway, moving forward, Michael is in the hideout of the Lost Boys, which is the remnants of an old hotel that collapsed during an earthquake. While there, Michael inadvertently drinks was looks like wine, but but of course it's basically blood, right? And I think we could tell right away because the bottle, there is a red liquid inside this bottle, but this bottle is basically, plastered with diamonds and gold all around it. But of course, if you to those who have seen this movie, probably realize that's not wine, that is blood. And and Michael drinks the blood, to which he thought it was wine. And then, if you also notice too, some of the members of the Lost Boys were chanting, "My go, my go, my go, my go," basically cheering on. They're basically cheering on because he's drinking that blood. And then he starts to develop some side effects, including sensitivity to sounds, a lack of reflection, and even flying. At one point, Michael almost attacks Sam, but is stopped by the family dog named Nanook, who is basically a husky, right? And when Sam notices Michael's faded reflection in a mirror and him being able to fly, he realizes his brother's a vampire, and in panic calls their mom, who is having dinner with Max. Also to mention this too, I actually had to appreciate the color grading as well during the nighttime scenes when during the nighttime scenes, especially inside the hideouts, and of course theme park, and of course the whole theme park at night. Like there is this very fireish color background. It's basically, a mix of orange and of red, orange, yellow, and maybe a little bit of red, orange, yellow, right? Although it has more of an orange background, so to say, at the fairground, because it has this hellish feel to it. Coming to think of it, because David and the Lost Boys, who are basically vampires, they're basically, uh, monsters or demons from hell, right? Which kind of explains that hellish background, right? Especially in their hideout as well. And also to mention too, going back to the fairground, there is this guy with this huge saxophone, showing off his guns while playing saxophone. Now, that scene alone kept going on for a little while, and that was when Michael was, turning his head back and forth, noticing Star for the first time. Like he sees Star, which is Jamie Gertz's character. Now, that whole saxophone player, I don't know his name, but my goodness, they really held on that. They really held on that scene. But that's just me. But it's the '80s. But it's the '80s, and I'll admit that saxophone player though, he is definitely blowing that saxophone pretty hard. If you know what I'm saying, right? And I believe his name is Tim Capello, who's basically the saxophone player, playing at the fair at night, right? You know what I'm saying, right? There's a lot of stuff that happens in the 80s, you know what I'm saying? Especially heavy metal. And I think heavy metal started to get a little more popular around that time, if you know what I'm saying, right? I mean, maybe the 70s too, but I feel like the 80s really took off on that. But who knows? It's definitely got that 80s feel, if you know what I'm saying, right? But anyway, let's get back to the movie. So Michael manages to calm Sam down to the point that when their mom arrives, Sam claims a comic book freaked him out. And the mom was like, "You got freaked out over by a comic book?" I'm sorry. He didn't buy the comic book. He bought the comic book by the Frog Brothers, right? Edgar and Allan, which is basically, funny enough, is basically a reference to Edgar Allan Poe, if you know what I'm saying, right? But anyway, so back to Sam, to which he claims a comic book freaked him out. Needless to say, Lucy is upset at having her evening ruined because Lucy was going to meet up with Max at that restaurant, but she felt bad after leaving him behind, if you know what I'm saying, right? So then, after these events, Michael returns to David's hideout, where he confronts Star, and she admits that the bottle that he drank from did contain David's blood, and his suspicions are true. To which, also to the point, Michael and Star, they basically made out. They basically, had sex, right, in this movie, and that definitely goes on for like a couple minutes, I believe. Even then, there is a song that plays in the background, and it's called "Cry Little Sister," which is basically the theme for this movie, right? And the song itself is very, very haunting too. Like the lyrics in this, song, like it's saying, "Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not die, cry. Last fire will rise behind those eyes, black house will rock, blind boys don't lie. Immortal fear, the voice so clear, through broken walls, that scream I hear." Like, my goodness, like, that song alone is very haunting, and I believe that fits the movie pretty well. The meaning behind it is basically themes of longing for family and the loss of innocence from a rejected youth's perspective. And that really fits in with the Lost Boys, particularly the vampires in this movie. Like I said, it's very haunting and eerie too. Like, and it fits well with not only that scene, but it's also played around. It's also, played in a couple of and it's also played in a couple of other scenes too, right? But yeah, that whole song, "Cry Little Sister," it is very haunting. But anyway, let's move forward. The next day, Sam accompanies his mom to Max's place to drop off some wine. However, they are both terrified when Max's dog Thorn attempts to attack Lucy, and feeling the attack seemed similar to something in the comic he was given, Sam tells the Frog Brothers. And apparently, in this comic, it appears that this vampire, it appears that, how, like, the head vampire, right? Because they mentioned the head vampire, like, who's the head vampire? And this head vampire also has this dog, which is basically a, quote, hellhound, right? And it seems as though that Lucy has met the Hellhound, right? But doesn't realize who the head vampire was. And of course, you all know who I'm talking. And to those who have seen this movie, you all know who I'm talking about, right? Yeah, yeah, I know I'm spoiling it right there, but I'm not gonna say the name. I'm not gonna say the name, but you all know who I'm talking about, right? But anyway, in regards to Michael, the brothers claim Sam has to stake Michael to kill him. Put a wooden stake inside the vampire's heart, which is basically Michael. But Sam refuses, confident that his brother is only a half vampire and that he can be saved if the head vampire is killed. After the way Thorn acted and not having seen Max in the daylight, Sam is convinced that Max is the head vampire. So Lucy invites Max over to dinner a few days later. Michael leaves when Max arrives, but not before, per Max's request, he invites him in the house. Sam has brought the Frog Brothers over for the dinner, and they attempt to expose him. However, none of their plans work, and they conclude that Max is not the head vampire. Oh, I'm pretty sure that will come back later on in the movie. But anyway, finally, Michael decides to take Star along with a little half vampire boy named Laddie Thompson, being played by Chance Michael Corbett, from Davis' clutches, and brings Sam and the Frog Brothers with him to kill David and his gang, while Michael grabs Star and Laddie. The inexperienced Frog Brothers manage to kill one vampire, who is basically, the name of that vampire is Marco, who's basically played by Alexander Winter from the Bill and Ted movies. And of course, they flee before they flee the cave out in the daylight. Apparently, David, who wakes up, who's going to maul them to death, but apparently his hand burns out in the daylight because when it comes to vampires, like Count Dracula, vampires don't like sun, right? They hate bright light, right? They hate the sun, right? And they basically burn to death, which is basically something that happens to David's hand in that moment. David smiles as the group escapes, saying, "Tonight." Basically, David is like, "Tonight, we take down this group." So, Sam, Michael, and the Frog Brothers prepare for the night ahead. They prepare a bathtub full of garlic and holy water, to which they took holy water from a church, and they prepare wooden stakes. Night falls, and David and the remainder of his crowd come to Sam and Michael's house to seek vengeance. Sam and Michael take out one of the vampires by electricity, where to which Sam and Michael like to which Sam has this bow and arrow, and he takes out this one vampire. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, this first vampire that the vampire that he took out, like, he shoots the vampire with a bow and arrow. He got up and says, "Ha, you miss." And Sam was like, "No, I didn't." He pulls out another arrow and shoots the vampire while he's still standing. Like, he could have moved out of the way at any time. He just stood there like an idiot, not realizing he was going to get shot. And then this arrow brings him to this stereo where he gets electrocuted and gets blown up. His head gets blown up completely, by the way. Death by stereo. Heavy metal, am I right? But anyway, let's move on to the Frog Brothers, which I think it's funny how Corey Feldman's character in that movie, he basically sounds like Sylvester Stallone. Come to think of it, but it's also funny too because behind the scenes, like, I think he was given a choice to, like, hey, take inspiration from either Chuck Norris or Sylvester Stallone. And throughout the whole movie, he sounds very much like a young Sylvester Stallone. And he definitely has some quippy lines too. Like, my favorite scene with Corey Feldman in this movie is basically when he goes up against this one vampire, and he's basically, he's scared shitless, by the way. He and his buddies are scared shitless. And when they see this vampire, like, they were scared shitless when they were in that cave killing Marco, and that vampire is literally right in front of them, and this vampire is like, "You're mine!" And the Frog Brothers, which is basically, Corey Feldman playing one of the Frog Brothers, um, he's basically scared, and this vampire is like, "You killed Marco!" And then Corey Feldman's character is like, "Yeah, you're next." But the vampire comes back and saying, "No, you guys are next." I don't know what's up with that interaction, but I loved it. Especially when they go in the bathroom, which is basically that bathtub filled with garlic and holy water. The vampire is like, "Garlic won't work, boys." But of course, Corey Feldman was like, "Try holy water, death breath." He throws holy water to the vampire's face, and he basically burns, and part of his face is burned. Until then, the dog Nanook comes in and drop kicks the vampire inside the bathtub where he basically, boils to death. And the Frog Brothers literally scream for their lives like cowards, realizing what a scary experience it is. And at the same time, the bathtub begins to combust, and including everywhere inside the house started spewing out blood like in an Evil Dead movie. Like, my goodness. That is basically an over the top death, You know what I'm saying, right? So then we get to the battle between David and Michael, to which, Michael is basically in his transformation into a vampire, right? Even before that, David, I remember the scene when David tells Michael that for his final, final test, right? Like, he basically is at this beach party, and all the members of all the vampires, started mauling and beating the crap out of those party goers. He's like, "You're one of us now, Mike. We are basically young. We stay young forever. You'll never grow old, Michael." That's kind of like Peter Pan, right? Peter Pan. Except Peter Pan is not a vampire, by the way. Jiminy Crickets. Imagine a vampire version of Peter Pan, huh? But anyway, Michael and Dave began to fight, right? They do this long distance shot. For a split second, they fly at long distance, and of course, the effect alone is a bit dated, but of course, it's 1987. So then they started fighting. They basically fight in the house. Like, Michael pushes David towards a wall, and David is like, "My turn." And David pushes him to another room, which is basically full of antlers. And to anyone's knowledge, Michael and Sam's grandpa is basically a hunter, right? So anyway, Mike David tells Michael, "I don't want to kill you, Mike. Join us." But Michael's like, "Never." But apparently, Dave was like, "It's too late. My blood is running through your whole body." And Michael's like, "Some of it is mine." So Michael just literally grabs David, throws him over to a table throws him over to the table that has one of the deer antlers, and impales David. Like, literally, Michael kills David. Like, I have no idea. I mean, Michael. I don't think Michael has killed anybody in this movie, and I think that was his first ever kill that he has ever done in this movie. And David screams in agony, being impaled by the antlers. And while that's going on, there is a bright light shining on his face. And then you hear the "Cry Little Sister" theme going on in the background. That's another time when that song is playing, because that was where he's basically dead, right? Basically, loss of innocence. Loss of innocence, and now he's being rejected, right? Like David, who just got killed by Michael, just got rejected and now dead, right? The fact that he has entered a dangerous supernatural world, right? Really fits, and like I said, that song really fits the whole idea of this movie, right? So apparently down the line, David is basically dead. So the only problem is that Michael doesn't go back to being human, meaning David is not the head vampire. Okay, who is the head vampire? Well, boy, yeah, it's Max. Max is basically the head vampire. Just when Lucy comes home with Max from a date, unseen by Max, Michael and Star hide in the shadows as Max approaches the deceased David. He appears to be upset by the death, and it's then revealed that Max is the head vampire and that David and his gang were Max's children of sorts. Max wanted David to make Michael and Sam part of the family so that Lucy would agree to be with Max, knowing what he is. Max wanted Lucy because his boys were in need of a mother. You know how, like in Peter Pan, right? Where the lost boys were in need of a mother, which is basically Wendy, right? Now it's all in reverse, because not only now it's all in reverse because, well, technically not in reverse, but sort of is, because Now Max is in need of a wife, but also now in need of new boys, right? Oh man, this is basically Vampire Peter Pan. Oh my goodness. And yeah, y'all know I kind of spoiled that a little bit in the middle of this episode where, you know, Sam's mom, Lucy, goes over to Max's house and, gets chased off by by the hellhound Thorn, right? And then of course another little detail too is that when Michael invited Max to the house, like his power, he is basically powerless, right? Because Max actually said, "Don't ever invite a vampire to your house. It renders powerlessly. It basically renders powerlessly." And of course, was also funny too. I think um Corey Feldman's character Edgar, he basically delivers the best line in that movie, in my opinion, when he sees Max as the head vampire. He's like, "The blood sucking Brady Bunch." Probably the best way to describe that moment. But it's also to mention too, during this shot where Max is standing right next to what appears to be a mountain lion. You know how like a mountain lions, although I guess you could say is a female lion, although I don't know if there are. I'm pretty sure there are male mountain lions. I guess there are probably male mountain lions, but you know how like he's basically like the leader, right? Male lions are basically leaders. It kind of fits pretty well with Max because Max is the head vampire. He's basically the leader, right? That's a nice little detail right there because he's standing right next to a mountain lion with his teeth, with his mouth open, and you see the fangs, right? That's what Max does in that movie too. Like he reveals himself with his vampire fangs too, right? So anyway, Max wanted Lucy because his boys were in need of a mother. Even though his boys are dead, he still wants Lucy. Max takes hold of Sam, telling Lucy that Sam will die if she doesn't come to him. Just then, Lucy's father busts into the house in his car equipped with wooden stakes. And Max is killed by, being impaled by the stakes and flying into a fireplace, blowing up, right? Like the fireplace blows up. Like Max got impaled by the stake and he gets burnt alive inside the fireplace. Holy crap, that is one way to go out for that vampire. But anyway, as Lucy makes sure her boys are okay, the grandfather who drove the car goes to the kitchen, pops open a root beer, and says, "There's one thing about living in Santa Carla I never could stomach: all the damn vampires." So it indicates that the grandpa knew about the vampires that are going on in this town, right? And of course the movie ends with the grandpa closing the refrigerator door, and that's how the movie ends, right? That's one way to go out. Although overall, I actually enjoyed this movie. Like, this was a fun movie. I mean, scary at times, but overall fun, even if it does go a little too deep into the sexual content, with that saxophone player, and then, of course, Michael and Star making out. Like, but other than that, I mean, the vampires alone, they're basically a force to be reckoned with. Those guys are basically psychopaths in that movie. I mean, hell, in the opening of the movie where they met when he where they got kicked out of the fairground, they actually attacked the security guards. They actually attacked the security guard for kicking them out, and it is done through the perspective of the viewer, right? Where we as the viewers are flying, but it's basically, the Lost Boys flying, right? And they basically attacked that security guard. Another moment happens when the vampires actually, ripped off the roof of this car and killed a couple of people in that car too, right? But also, if you also notice too, there are also missing people posters, right? Indicating that the people were basically the victims of those vampire attacks, right? And then also, like, there's a lot of stuff in that movie I really liked. I mean, let's be honest, the atmosphere alone is pretty good, especially during the fairground and the vampire's cave, right? The atmosphere is like is basically crazy too because these are basically, demons from hell, right? Monsters, and those vampires stay young forever. Like, they're basically, heavy metal vampires, so to say. And I'll be honest, those vampires alone would wipe the floor with Edward and those vampires from the Twilight Saga. My goodness. Like, poor representation of vampires in those movies. The Lost Boys did a real good job portraying vampires in a horrifying way, right? In fact, the Lost Boys has been credited with helping shift depictions of vampires in pop culture and bringing a more youthful, sexier appeal to the vampire genre, right? And I'll be honest, those vampires did have a bit of a sexy feel to it, you know. The vampires in this movie are young, right? Late teenagers, I believe, if you know what I'm saying. Especially the scene in which David transforms, and of course this whole shift, the whole depiction, this actually inspired subsequent films like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. There's even a scene in which David transforms noodles into worms was directly referenced in the 2014 vampire mockumentary film What We Do in the Shadows. And of course the film inspired the song of the same name by the Finnish gothic rock band the 69 Eyes from their 2004 album Devils. Themes and practical effects from the movie are referenced in the lyrics and music video of Gunship's 2018 Dark All Day. Tim Capello, as I mentioned, who performed the song I Still Believe on the Lost Boys soundtrack, collaborated on the Gunship track. Capello appears in the film as lead performer at the beach concert, vocals and saxophone. And yeah, they really held on that scene pretty. They really held on that scene for a long time. If you know what I'm saying, especially when Michael goes back and forth between the saxophone player and Star. Right, Star in this movie, like, she's not in that movie for very much. She was definitely a pretty good character. Although I do feel bad that she was basically a vampire herself, right? And you know what? Michael and Star are a better couple than Bella and Edward from Twilight Saga. That is actually the truth. But anyway, let's move forward. The music in this movie, most notably the songs, the song choices are pretty good too. Especially Cry Little Sister, to which I've already mentioned that a lot. The hints on Max being the head vampire, like, I thought was pretty clever because knowing that his dog Thorn, who, chases off Lucy, is basically, Max's hellhound, you know what I'm saying? And then of course, the whole dinner scene where Michael invites Max into the house, and that's like because Michael in Michael basically, Michael invites Max into the house. And Max saying, "Don't you ever invite a vampire into the house. It will render you powerless." Well, although unfortunately in the final fight, Michael didn't invite Max this time. And then I thought the grandpa was a pretty good character too. Like, he even knew that there were vampires in this town, which explains why he had all the stakes ready, right? The wooden stakes, if you know what I'm saying. Edgar and Alan were fun characters too. I even like how Edgar was sounds more like Sylvester Stallone, right? A young Sylvester Stallone. Imagine taking something. Imagine if he also went on the Chuck Norris route, right? You know all those Chuck Norris memes, right? Chuck Norris doesn't kill vampires. He just drinks their blood. That sounds like a Chuck Norris thing, right? Imagine Corey Feldman's character Edgar taking inspiration from Chuck Norris, mixing together Chuck Norris and Sylvester Stallone. Imagine if that happened. But I did like the Sylvester Stallone route that he went with. And the mom was also pretty good too. I do like the mom in this movie, Diane Wiest. And I thought Max was pretty good as the head vampire. Although I will say though, the whole final interaction felt a little rushed, but I was okay with it. I think my main issue with that whole ending, to be honest, though, the fight scenes could should have been a little longer. Like, Like it should have been a little longer. I get it that this film came out in 1987 and technology wasn't as advanced, so to speak, but I would have loved to see a longer fight between of those vampires during the final battle, right? If you know what I'm saying. I mean, it could have been longer, but the way how they were able to execute it, I still enjoy it. But other than that, the story itself is pretty good. Like it is a fun story. It is a fun story to say right there. But and such. But other than that, and also one more thing about the music, I do like the eerie orchestra and organ music that Thomas Newman put into the movie, especially at the end where Michael kills David. Like you hear the organ in the background when David gets impaled by the antlers. Like you hear that organ that is playing in the background. That was a nice little touch right there. And actually, one more thing to mention: the flying scenes, especially when you don't see David and the rest of the Lost Boys. The flying scenes when it's from the perspective of the viewers, I really enjoyed because that's basically like the Jaws effect. It's kind of like the less you see of the monster or killer, the more better intense it gets, right? I really like those moments. Plus Michael's flying scene, especially when he's getting dragged out of the house, that was a pretty good effect as well. And I'm pretty sure that scene holds up pretty well to this day. Even the bridge scene was also a bit intense too. Like it's also scary too because Michael is hanging on for dear life as the vampires jump off the bridge, and of course we all know this is basically part of the test of Michael becoming a vampire, right? They're basically falling off this bridge, going through this thick fog, and he's basically floating in the air, right? Kind of like like what a bat does, right? So to say, that was a pretty intense but cool moment at the same time too. And Sam was also a fun character too, like especially when he reads that comic book, and when he's also with Edgar and Alan, they provide some good moments too, especially when Sam quotes this Superman quote, truth, justice, and the American way. That's like the line that Superman says in the comics, right? And both the Frog brothers understand that too, because there is this whole aisle full of comic books, and there's like DC comics as well. Also, the nice little reference to Richard Donner as well, because Richard Donner directed the first Superman movie that came out in 1978. So I thought that was like a nice little reference to, Superman comics as well. But it did remind me of Richard Donner directing Superman, right? The Lost Boys, I know I mentioned that a lot, but the Lost Boys, the vampires themselves, they were creepy. They were definitely creepy, scary, gothic as hell, man. Like my goodness, those guys were a real force to be reckoned with. Kiefer Sutherland did a fantastic job playing David in this movie. I just wish they have a little bit of backstory of how he became, the vampire that he is, right? But other than that, I think that's about it for this movie. So there you have it, folks. That is my take on the Lost Boys movie. So, to anybody out there who is listening, what did you guys think of the Lost Boys movie? Have you seen this movie? Did you like the movie? Did you not like the movie? Do you think this movie holds up to this day? I would love to hear your thoughts. And if I'm missing out on anything from this movie, please let me know in the comments below. But other than that, that will be a wrap for this episode. And also, one other thing, if I were to rate this movie, I would give it an 8 out of 10. It was a scary but fun movie to watch, And for what they presented in this movie, I had a real fun blast with this movie. But other than that, that would be about it. So that will be a wrap for this episode. Thank you all for tuning in to Codo Cinema. I'm your host, Mark Codo, aka Codoman. Remember to watch movies, stay positive, and good night. Till next week.